Good day. Welcome to EIT 2020 and specifically this session of EIT 2020, which is technically titled Information Assurance and Cybersecurity Requirements for Working with the U.S. Government, but on a more practical level is if you want to get a fairly well-paying and stable job with the federal government or take the same information and extend it to other governments throughout the world. This is what we're going to talk about in this session today. I'm Dr. David Anderson. I'm a full-time faculty member at the Department of Computer Information Systems at Triton College here in the Chicago area. And my colleague, who is not with us today, is Dr. Carl Reimers. He is a full-time faculty member at the Tillman School of Business at the University of Mount Olive in Mount Olive, North Carolina. I'm a retired Army officer where I worked. My last assignment was in information assurance, and after that, after retiring, I became a civilian systems engineer, first working for a small company headquartered up in the Northbrook area known as Allstate. A lot of you probably heard of that. They had an IT division that was responsible for supporting their IT or their business operations throughout the world, and specifically the U.S. And I was specifically focused with my team in supporting the company's IT operations in the Indianapolis area. Okay, had a great time. Really enjoyed my time with them. Unfortunately, and I still don't completely understand this. In 2000, they made the decision, and there was a lot of this going on then, to sell their IT operations to a consulting firm, a contracting firm headquartered in New York City, and then they were going to turn around and lease back those same services from the contracting firm, and this was financially advantageous to them. I'm quite not sure exactly how, because my pay didn't stop or anything, but they went ahead and did it. And as soon as they did it, or shortly after they did it, the firm, my new boss company in New York City, thought that I was just the right person to move to New York City and be part of their team there. And I was not at all interested in doing that. So I left Allstate, went to work for Raytheon. They had the largest facility to include the Pentagon. And one location is actually the Raytheon facility in Indianapolis, and I worked there as a web farm manager and as a technical advisor, technical instructor for some of their uh, IT systems, one in particular known as IFCAS, and that was very interesting. Had a lot of fun with that, got a little bit of travel in. Unfortunately, for me, they decided that I was just the right person in 2001 to relocate to Amman, Jordan, and head up their technical training team there, which I did not want to do. I'd retired from the Army not to do things like that. I had been moving my entire life since I was a kid. My father had been in the Army also, and the idea of just settling down and raising a family was very attractive to me. So, took a pay cut, went to work for Triton College here, and I've been here ever since, working full-time as a faculty member and then doing various things on the side as time and opportunity allowed. I have a doctoral degree in information technology and master's degree in EDS, as well as various information technology industry certifications from CompTIA, from Cisco, CIW, and Microsoft. And I'm a member of the FBI InfraGuard Chicago, which is something that I encourage everybody to look into. It's purely voluntary, but it's a nice way to give back, and it does. And from a networking standpoint, it doesn't hurt any either. Okay, when we talk about the IT market, and most of us, why we do it, because we really like what we do, and it's very interesting, and there's lots of different things to do. The bottom line is there's a lot of opportunity there too. Okay, in 2020, okay, the latest numbers I have available is that the U.S. information technology market, is estimated to be about $1.7 trillion. That's a lot of money, and that's only 32% of the worldwide market. There is a lot of information technology opportunity out there. Information technology careers are many, they're varied. There's a wide range to choose from. People can get involved in operating systems, networking, data centers, security, which includes cybersecurity, and many other fields. And this is distinct from things like getting involved in computer science, getting involved in double E work, okay, which are also computer related, but not necessarily information technology focused. Okay, there's really no ceiling no matter what you want to do. There's great employment opportunities. There's money. There's work-life balance, and the thing, the reality is you can generally pick from this, these categories. You probably will not get them all, but you can certainly pick the ones that are most important to you. For example, for me, retiring from the Army and then leaving Raytheon and leaving Allstate, my focus was on was a work-life balance. I really, really wanted to settle down and be the best dad that I could be for my children. So for that, and I wanted stable employment. So for that, I was willing to take a little bit less on the money side, and I was willing not to travel so much. Although as a faculty member, travel has really worked out very well. Before children came along, the ability to just basically go, for extended periods of time anywhere I wanted to in the summer was really kind of nice. And then again, with the children coming along, the ability to take time during the summer to recharge, attend conferences like this one have come along as well. And this is true for me, and it can certainly be true for you. But realistically, very, very few of us are going to find ourselves getting all four of these. Three is pretty, but still, three of the four is, I think, pretty decent. Okay. When we talk about money, something else you want to consider is not just the salary that you can earn in various locations. You also want to, as a practical matter, think about the cost of living. You very likely get paid more money in New York, say, or Chicago or LA, no question, but you're also going to be paying a lot more. For example, an unadjusted salary in New York City, for example, of $125,000 sounds like a lot, and it is. Okay, but adjusted for cost of living, it's really just under $100,000. And then, okay, because we've just talked about the cost of living, says the state and local taxes in New York are going to be about 50%, 40 to 50%. So you're really going to actually take home a lot less than that compared to a place like outside Chicago, in the Chicago Collar counties, or in what we call or what many people refer to as the flyover country, the central part of the United States. Just things to consider. Anytime you're looking at any kind of a job, okay, whether it's with the state or local or federal government or private sector, there are four things you want to be looking at. Okay, realistically. Formal education, okay, you want to get a degree. And the reason you want to get a degree, even if it's not in the field that you ultimately wind up working in, a double E working in IT or doing programming, or a mechanical engineer working in IT or programming, is that the ability to start and finish a formal degree shows employers that you have persistence. And persistence is hugely, hugely important. The last thing that anybody wants in the workplace is an employee that they can't count on. They never know when they're going to be there and when they're not going to be there. Industry certifications, especially in information technology, not really so much in computer science or double E work, although they have certifications as well. But because information technology is so varied and there is so much going on, okay, it's not fair to expect human resources, certainly, and to a certain extent, not so much even necessarily the IT manager, to really have a good grip on what you may or may not have learned in school. And therefore, the industry certifications are used to a certain extent as a little bit of a crutch. They're not really, how to put this? Industry certifications are really not for the other people in your field, although it certainly doesn't hurt to have them in many cases, but they are for the non-field people, for the IT department, to show them, to reassure them, if you will, that you have in fact learned the things that your formal education says that you should have learned. Practical experience, okay, it's very, very helpful if for many jobs, not all jobs. And the government is actually a little more lenient about this. They know they're going to sit you down and show you what goes on to a much greater extent, I think, than many private industry positions where they want you to be able to get up and get running now. I know that it was very attractive to Allstate and to Raytheon that I had practical experience in the things that they wanted me to do. Whereas when I was in the Army, there was an expectation that if you have the smarts, you will, especially if we can satellite you with somebody, you will learn the things you need to do and you will build the experience. And of course, personal connections. It's true. And it's always been true that a personal connection to a hiring position is really, really hard to beat because, again, it goes to that, like industry certifications, it goes to that reassurance. If somebody is willing to vouch for you, you have that personal connection, that can go a long way toward reassuring the hiring agency or individual that you have what they're looking for. Okay. Now, the reason for the surging demand in cybersecurity and cybersecurity positions in the U.S. and really throughout the world, we're seeing a record number of security issues. And every year, I still remember when 2017 was just a record year for security breaches, and then 2018 was a record year for security breaches, and then 2019 was a record year for security breaches. And 2020 has had its own share of record breaches, overshadowed a certain amount in the news by COVID virus news and things like that. But still, they still manage to make news, especially when security breaches have to do with organizations, individuals attempting to steal the COVID virus vaccine data or anything like that. And new problems are going to keep appearing. And a classic example is data breaches were enough of a problem when they were limited to financial information, which tended to shadow the fact that they were actually going on all the time across the board. But with the high visibility of anything virus and COVID virus related, when it became apparent that foreign governments and foreign individuals and local individuals are attempting to penetrate and steal the data having to do with the COVID virus, various COVID virus vaccines, and says it popped up again. And later this year and next year, I'm sure we will continue. We will have new surprises in terms of cybersecurity data vulnerabilities. And a flip side of this also is the dark web. Okay, we're increasingly finding that children's personal data is for sale. And case in, not a case in point, but an example. When I was young, it was very, very common for proud parents to, and I thought serious about doing this myself, when when you pop your kids in the tub. And I still remember how cute I thought it was when both my children they'd be like 2 and 4 years old, or 3 and 5 years old, and they'd fit into the bathtub, and they each had half the tub, and they had their suds, and they had their toys, and they just had a wonderful time taking baths with each other. There's a little bit of an assurance factor there. And it was used to be very common when families did that. The parents would take pictures of their kids in the tub, and they would send the pictures to their brothers and sisters and say, "Look, here's your niece and nephew, in the tub. Aren't they cute?" And everybody did this. Okay, now you really can't do that because people who have done that have posted, privately their children's photos in the bath or whatever, or playing out their new toys, on the web for their, in-laws and friends to look at and go, "Oh, aren't they so cute?" Are finding that those same photographs are winding up on the dark web, where they are for sale for people interested in child pornography. This is totally, totally uncool. Okay, but we're seeing it happen. Okay, data security incidents are continuing. Okay. To date, the largest distributed denial of service attack ever recorded was 1.7 terabits per second. Okay, and it probably won't stop there. That's just the largest one that we know about. In just 1 year, in 2019, the initial cost attributed to cyber attacks increased 52% to nearly $2 trillion nationally. 2 in 5 companies here in the U.S. have reported negative customer experiences and reputation loss following a successful attack. And I can certainly vouch for that. Just last night, my son asked me to go on board to his Funko Pop website, where they had some new stuff coming on sale, new online virtual convention at 5 o'clock Pacific time, 7 o'clock local time, that you could go in and you could purchase some new Funko Pop stuff that they just released. Really clever marketing on their point. So I went in there and I immediately purchased, put in my basket for sale, for purchase, the two Funko Pop things that he was really, really wanted to get in, that his allowance, would allow him to get. And I was, had them in my cart, went through the checkout process, and they calculated the tax, no problem. But when it actually came to calculating the shipping charges, I was there stuck for about an hour, just waiting and waiting and waiting. I'm sure there was because of the flood of other customers, but it could have been denial of service attack just as easily. And when I finally was allowed to purchase my two items, I was actually only allowed to purchase just the one item. The other one was sold out. And I was not a happy camper because I knew that my son was going to be a little upset. And I had basically been sitting there, not touching my computer, doing anything else, waiting for the shipping charges to be calculated for nearly an hour. I was not a happy camper about that. 93% of respondents report experiencing cyber attacks in the past 12 months. Only 7%, seven organizations out of 100, 7 people out of 100 claim not to have experienced attack. And bear in mind, of those 7%, some might have been attacked. They just don't know that they were attacked. Okay, and cyber attacks were a weekly occurrence for 1/3 organizations, just like many of you, certainly true of me, every day when I go into my email. Okay, I spend a certain amount of time just deleting spam and basically marking certain emails as phishing attempts with the hope that I'm hopefully making things better for everybody by taking the time and trouble to report it. Okay, uh, same thing is happening to organizations. There's a lot of hacking going on out there. We're seeing a mode of attack on corporate networks is shifting away from mass probing, mass spam emails on large numbers of computers to social engineering thrusts targeted at particular individuals. And and this is an example of malware, phishing, denial of service, ransomware, and personal data. And a classic example of this is when the DNC systems were penetrated back in 2016. Okay, it was because of some phishing email that was sent to some senior DNC officials. Leon Panetta comes to mind, who fell for it. The email said, "Oh, there's been a problem with your data. Click here, we'll get it all sorted out." They did, and basically, in doing so, they gave up. They enabled Trojan software and malware to be installed on the systems, compromising the usernames and passwords, and the hackers continued to leverage that. And we still don't know all of what happened because the DNC refused to let the FBI look at it. They didn't want the chance of whatever was found to be leaked to the press. So they would rather deal with it internally, possibly not as well. We don't know that, maybe better, but they didn't want it to become public information. Okay, hackers are using careless social media users, and it's not just you and I, no matter how careful we are, but that certainly has a factor, but also our friends and neighbors. It's very, very common, for example, when families plan to go somewhere for the weekend. And here in the Chicago area, we go to Branson. Before the virus, we would go to Branson, we'd go to Wisconsin Dell, we would go away for a weekend to Six Flags or whatever, or to one of the water parks. And even though the parents might stop the mail and be very careful about the fact they were going to be gone for several days to a week, their kids would blab it all over the world. Okay, and there are people who are, and there's software that's very, very good at basically collecting that information, raking that information off, say, Facebook, off social media, and so that when the family is away for the several days to a week is when that white panel van with the Acme Services logo drives up into their driveway in their yard, and the gentlemen get out with their denim shirts and their caps, which conveniently hide their face, and their Acme Services Bob, logo on their shirt, and their clipboards and their wireless tablets, and they basically break in and they can steal everything. Okay, and bear in mind, that it's not just local consumers, local businesses. 50% of industrial control system networks have faced cyber attacks. You might remember Die Hard with a Vengeance, when they're trying to bring down the internet and force the Wall Street to stash all their data in these servers that are located covertly in the Social Security Administration. Okay, but at one point they're actually attempting to bring down the power systems, and there are nation states that are very, very interested in doing that sort of thing. Okay, and all of this has a cost. The total cost in 2018 of cybercrime was estimated at $600 billion. Okay, that is $600 billion in the U.S. that could have been used for health, education, welfare, okay, housing, you name it. And it wasn't, because it was used to recover from various types of cybercrime. And of course, the media is having problems with this too. On the one hand, they are victims of it. On the other hand, they are making sure in a headline garnering, click gathering way that everybody knows about it. And on the one hand, the news is good. On the other hand, it would be nice if the news could be balanced to induce consumer care with what they are doing rather than consumer panic. But you garner clicks by putting out headlines that are attractive to people, so that is what they've been going after. Okay, and another way of looking at it, the tracking sites are seeing that commercial businesses, the hackers are going where they perceive the money to be. Okay, and that in fact is what we're seeing. Healthcare is showing a recent spike in breach activity, and of course, hopefully everybody is aware that just recently several very organizations and individuals that are linked to various other nation states have been caught / accused of attempting to access virus and COVID-19 virus data information. And bear in mind that if you're working for another country, okay, or you've been asked to help your country wherever you happen to live, and and you had friends and relatives that have recently been hospitalized with COVID-19, possibly died because of COVID-19, you might not really see a problem with stealing virus vaccine information from the U.S. with the rationalization that, hey, let's save the lives first, and then we can worry about settling out patent rights and property rights later. Lives are more important. Okay. An Osaka study found that non-malicious insiders are the #2 threat actors behind hackers. A lot of times people who are not necessarily think of themselves as a threat, and certainly you and I don't think of themselves as a threat, can in fact be a threat. The #1 network security compromise day in just about any organization is going to be their Bring the Children to Work day, where parents bring their kids to work, and the kids are just doing stuff, and they're knocking stuff off, and they're playing on mom's and dad's computer, and there's clicking on stuff, and they see an email to download this really neat game that's free, which will get my kids to click on it in a heartbeat, and they are doing so. And in fact, at my house, one of the first things I did was make sure that my children, we don't have family computers at my house. My children each have their own computers, used, bought them on eBay, and I have my own computers, used, bought on eBay, and the two just don't meet, because I know, being kids, that they are going to click on anything. It's what kids do. And in fact, it's a fact of life, and we'll get more into this in security as well. Until you're past your early 20s, and says your ability to control your impulses is just not there, and this is a little bit of a problem for many of us. A PwC Global State Survey found that 91% of organizations have adopted risk-based security frameworks, and 91% use some form of advanced authentication. The top issues are malware, provisioning, P2 protection, and end-user vulnerabilities. Only 50% have a chief information security officer. Usually they'll have a chief security officer, but he works for someone in the C-suite, usually your IT officer, rather than having an own separate voice. Less than 50% reported having organizational board participation in security strategy. And the sources of compromise were, contrary to TV and movie themes of people hacking it from the outside, they were current or former employees, followed by service providers almost 90% of the time. Okay, now, having said all that to lay the groundwork, nation states have the same problems that large organizations do. Plus, nation states threats tend to be ignored most of the time. We just don't, most people, when they think of data security breaches, they think of banks, they think of credit card companies, they think of eBay or Amazon. They don't tend to think of the United States or Great Britain or India. Okay, and nation states, in addition to their problems tending to be ignored, have special problems. Elections, governmental administration, awarding contracts, things like that, security. And as Obama noted in 2016 when he poo-pooed the whole notion that somebody could hack the U.S. elections, and he was quite right to make this observation, there are thousands of state and local election entities, okay, and they're all distinct, they're all separate, and the idea of somebody being able to penetrate all of those thousands of state and local election entities and make a separate effort to elect, Mr. Smith from Podunk, Arkansas, okay, to become president is in reality not very likely. It says, on the other hand, okay, you don't have to do that to potentially influence an election. The 2000 presidential election between Bush and Gore was decided by just 537 votes in the state of Florida. So, arguably, and I'm not saying this happened, if an actor wanted to, a hostile actor wanted to somehow, and was able to somehow hack into an election in one of the larger Florida municipalities and manipulate the voting there by 538 votes, okay, Al Gore, not George Bush, could have arguably, theoretically, carried the state of Florida, carried the federal election, carried the board of electors, the electoral senate, the college of electors, and been elected president. Okay, so there's more than one way to just look at this, but that would imply ahead of time that an agent would have known that the election would be so close and would come down to just those 500 odd votes in the state of Florida, and knowing that ahead of time, that's really asking a lot, and that's a little bit unlikely. Okay, when we're talking about security, okay, one of the topics or questions I like to ask in my security classes right off the bat is, what is the single most effective thing you can do? Keep teenagers off your PCs, install and keep current your good antivirus software. My personal favorite when I'm talking to the students is put my computers in a hole in the backyard and bury them all up, or the college student favorite, own nothing. Because if you own nothing, grasshopper, then nothing can be stolen from you. It's a very Zen-like philosophy, but it's not very realistic. Okay, nation states have trouble with all of these. They hire people, especially in the military. People are hired and put to work right out of high school. Okay, they're sent to training. They're hired when they enlist when they're 18, or they go to work for the government when they're 18. They're given their training, they're given their job, and when they're 19 or 20, they are at work doing stuff. They have a couple months of experience, and they're pretty much on their own. And that doesn't necessarily always bode well for it. Keep installing and keep current and good antivirus software can be tough to do when there's an estimated 21 new virus or virus variants hitting the internet streets every day. And of course, it would be totally secure if you buried your computers and digital devices in a hole in your backyard, okay? But then you can't use them. And owning nothing is really simply not practical from a nation state, because their job is to protect their citizens, okay? And the significance of the problem is worldwide. Every country reports offenders, and every country reports incidents. Now, the number of incidents, say in the U.S., where they are a victim is much greater, but they still have situations where organizations of the U.S. or an element of the U.S. or just individuals acting on their own are out there doing things. Okay, and this is just what we know about. This is not everything that has happened. Okay, the demand. In addition to the needs of the civilian organizations, nation states have been and are creating cybersecurity and hacking units for the express purpose of penetrating foreign organizations. And this goes back to before World War I. In World War I, there was a famous Zimmerman telegram where the communications between the German embassy in Washington and the German government in Berlin were basically being penetrated by newspapers looking for news and caused a little bit of a brouhaha. And there were, on the one hand, some of the information was a little bit interesting. You know, they were questioning this. The German government during World War I was actively attempting to get Mexico to commit that if the U.S. declared war against Germany in World War I, that Mexico would declare war against the U.S. And this is what countries do. But still, it was a little bit of a flap, and it pointed to two things: one, that it was happening, and two, that the German embassy's communications were being monitored by the news organizations. I believe it was the New York Times or the Washington Post. Okay, and in addition to trying to penetrate foreign organizations, nation states are trying to defend against the same actions by other nation states or individuals or organizations. It's not just other nation states. Okay, and this map gives you a quick look at, given depending on where you are, okay, what sort of problems you can expect. Okay, and bear in mind also that different nation states have their own focus. Russia's primary focus, at least for individual organizations that are linked to the national government, is to weaken unity of their perceived possible opponents or adversaries. And in fact, in December 2018, Chicago Tribune did a very nice piece on how a tweet by an account that was tracked to a Russian, an actor linked to the Russian government, was looked at, and a lot of what we call useful idiots on both sides of, and this happens on both sides of the fence, both left wing, center, and right wing, will see something, they think it's interesting, and they will tweet it. If you have a tweet on a topic like global warming, depending on where you are, that can either be a good topic or a bad topic. You have an actor who says they're from the Great States Plains or from New York City. People will say, oh, that must be where they're from. And it gets repeated ad nauseum, gets tremendous exposure. And Russia's actually very, very good at that. Chinese and organizations, individuals linked to China, tend to focus more on infrastructure penetration. They really have demonstrated tremendous interest in the ability to penetrate and compromise U.S. infrastructure. And the assumption is that they're doing it to just gather the data so that if they ever really want to do it, they can virtually shut down the U.S. at a time that's important to them. North Korea's focus tends to be for financial gain. They have a real economic income issue, and so they tend to focus on things that, like ransomware, malware, theft of intellectual property that can make them money, theft of financial data. Iran, a little bit like Russia, tends to focus more on, again, the sowing of discord and what they perceive to be their enemies. And that's not just the U.S., but they are committed to the thought that they should be the regional power within the Middle East. Okay, so they tend to focus on anything that on actions that can weaken the unity of their perceived possible opponents, you know, for regional leadership. And of course, the U.S. is great Satan, so we can assume that we come in for a little bit of that, and we do it also. Stuxnet worm, and this is back in the 80s, at a time when Iran was perceived as being rapidly pursuing the nuclear program, and we, along with the Israelis, inserted some malware into their nuclear enrichment program, which basically stalled it for years, okay, without them knowing about it. We try to influence foreign elections ourselves, and they can be as simple as the State Department allocating money, and they do this in their budget for certain organizations within a foreign, within a foreign country to influence election to elect the leaders that we want. Uh, and as well as the NSA has things that they prefer not to talk about in the gathering of information, which they then turn around and make available to the appropriate agencies here in the U.S. Okay, and I want to stress every nation state has this capability or wants to build this capability to a greater or lesser extent. Our allies do it, neutrals do it, adversaries do it. You don't have to be an adversary or a perceived adversary of the United States or any country to have an interest, have a possible interest in their intellectual property or their money. Okay, all countries do this, and even if a country didn't do this, you could argue that it's very unlikely that none of the individuals in that country want to do this. And we've seen an example of this just recently with the individuals linked to China and to Russia that we know of that have been attempting to compromise and gather the relatively successful, thus far not finished testing COVID-19 vaccines. They may, as far as they're concerned, they may be finished enough for them to want to start using it right away. And we can assume that simply because we only know about Russia and China's possible hacking attempts, if you don't think that there are individuals from every country that are trying to get that information, so you have another thing coming. Um, without having any concrete information about it, I can't imagine that if South Africa, if France, if Poland, if agents within those countries couldn't come up with that information, then turn around, reverse engineer it, and manufacture it, even though it's not fully tested, and say that they did it independently on their own to save the lives of, of the people, and get a grip on the COVID-19 virus in their country, you really have another thing coming. Okay, and yes, reasonable people can agree. It's like communism. The theory is great. The reality is flawed. U.S. and Russia have made agreements about what they will and will not do, but still, hacking goes on. The U.S. and China, we've actually established formal agreements and talks about what we will and what we will not do. But the hacking attempts still go on. And while we can say that somebody is linked to a foreign government, doesn't necessarily mean that they are acting at the behest of of a monolithic foreign government. Okay, they may not be. And even in U.S. and NATO, okay, which are allies if anybody's allies. Okay, we agree, but we still attempt to gather information from each other, sort of on a friendly basis most of the time, but we still do it. And we can assume that if we have these problems, every other country has these problems with a different slant on it because they have their own particular focuses and issues. But still, you can assume it's going on. Okay. Nation-state cyber attacks. We're seeing a public web server-based advanced penetration testing attempts from Chinese groups in North Korea for supply chain attacks, and hijack attacks from Russia and Iran. Okay, and these are just the highlights of the ones that we know about. There's a lot more out there. And we are seeing that nation-state attackers are learning to piggyback on top of one another's efforts, something to watch out for in 2020. A little bit like a game of King of the Hill. If you remember playing King of the Hill, where you just have a hilltop and everybody would try to be at the top of it. When you got to the top, you would basically try to keep everybody off of it, and whoever could get on top and stay on top would be king of the hill. And then you would find people that wanted to topple whoever's a king of the hill. They couldn't do it individually, so two of them would basically get together and try to push, somebody off, and then somebody behind them would follow up behind them, and as soon as they pushed them off, they would put their hands on their backs and use their own momentum to push them off so that they could be on top. And we're seeing the electronic equivalent of that starting to develop, and I think we're going to see more of it. Okay. And the U.S., and I'm sure other nation states, are aware of this. The Wall Street Journal, published an opinion piece about how the U.S. has been given and is now creating hacking units to deter and answer attacks. And you can't just wave your arms and have this done. You can't just move people from another department where they've been doing something completely unrelated and say, okay, you're doing this now. These have to be people that have formal education and experience in this sort of thing. CIA, okay, in 2018 received more offensive hacking powers, and they immediately announced they wanted to orchestrate at least a dozen operations across the world. Well, that means more hiring, and this is just what they're willing to talk about. Okay. And examples of this, we've talked about this just a little bit. We, and you can assume other countries, are not shy about when we can go out and gather information or hinder the efforts of what we perceive to be activities that are not going to be beneficial to the future of our country. We do it. Okay. We have interfered with the development of programs. We have published hacking tools of other countries. We have tried to cause financial chaos, mayhem in other countries. We have attempted to embarrass and reveal security problems with other countries. And other countries you can assume, have the same problems that we have. The FBI also trying to ramp up their cyber, capabilities. And it's not just at the federal level. All the state governments are trying to do this. And it's not just the civilian state governments. The National Guard, which is, yes, it's part of the U.S. military, but it is owned and operated, unless it's been federalized, by each state. So we have 50 National Guards. They are all, and this is distinct from this headline, they are all trying to ramp up their cyber capabilities as well. Okay, and which means contractor support as well. Surveys show that more than half of all companies plan on increasing their cybersecurity spending in 2019. Okay, 30% of companies plan to increase spending by 10 to 20%, and only 1 in 3 companies said they don't feel ready to combat a cybersecurity threat. So 2 out of 3 is good, but not all that good. Okay. And basically, hackers are going after where the money is, and we're seeing that in terms of spending guide, where the money is being spent. The more money you have, the more money you are willing to spend, generally speaking. Okay, and you can see the surge in terms of billions of dollars between 2018, which is 37, and 2020, which is $42 billion. Okay. And the significant amount of that money is being spent on jobs and salaries. Okay, which gets us into certifications. McKillop and others established back in 1998 that industry certifications can be a lawyer passing the bar exam, can be a doctor passing his boards, it can be a nurse passing her boards, okay, or in information technology, you increasingly see certifications for various specialties, which again act as an assurance that the person can do at least a little bit of what their resume and their paper history says that they can do. Okay. And again, as I just mentioned, many academic programs in accounting, engineering, law, medical, and teacher education have licensing exams, and this is pretty much the same thing, okay, except it's licensing exams for information technology. And I want to stress to you, this is not so much a case in EE, although they do have certifications as well, not so much a matter in computer science, okay, although they have certifications as well, but information technology has a lot of certifications, both vendor and vendor neutral, okay? And because there are so many different potential certifications out there, okay, and employers requiring their employees to have them is usually not much of an issue. It happens not all the time, not everywhere, but it happens a lot in a lot of places in information technology. Okay, the federal government looked at this. Okay, looked at the wide number of different certifications out there, going back to Novell's Certified Network Engineer in 1989. Okay, threw their hands up and said, we can't just say you can have any of these in account. They looked at it and said, we want to use a benchmark to determine that people can in fact do what they say they're going to be able to do. Okay? But we can't just do everything. So in 2004, 2005, they published DoD Regulation 8570, which has been superseded by 8140 now. And basically, they were looking at going one step beyond training, which is an annual requirement in many companies and all DoD related organizations. Okay, but what they're finding is that social media, smartphones, family and friends, okay, can negate that to a little extent, especially if nobody really knows what they're doing. They want to do the right thing, but they're not really sure what it is. So 2004, 2005, 8570 was published. Okay, it's well worth looking up on the internet. And basically, it established enterprise-wide or organization-wide requirements that anybody working in information assurance within the DoD or contractor support for DoD would have to have. Initially, when it was first implemented, waivers were granted for people to give employees 6 months to basically acquire the necessary credentials, and then they would be fine. And then in the last, since 2015, certainly the waivers no longer granted. You have to have them going in the door, because every now and then they would find somebody would be doing the work and they would just never get the credential, and you can't have that. Okay, this is a current chart of the credentials at the various levels. Okay, hardware level, software level, system level. If you want jobs that are that meet these categories, okay, you have to have at least one of the relevant credentials here. And I'm here to tell you that a lot of these credentials, especially the CompTIA Security Plus, for example, they are not hard to get. Okay, not hard to get whatsoever. Okay, or A plus. Okay, and of course, the more complex, the more demanding a particular credential is, the fewer there people there are for it, the more money that it pays. And the positions are pretty stable. Okay, they're not going, especially if you're working for the federal government, not a contractor working for the federal government, but the federal government itself. Okay, these positions are going to be around for a long time. That's just the way the federal government is. I think it was Ronald Reagan who once made the observation back in the 70s or 80s that there is nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. Or another example is that until just a few years ago, if you ever looked at your phone bill, one of the fees in your phone bill was a telecommunications tax. The telecommunications tax was enacted by Congress before 1900. It was to help fund the Spanish-American War. Okay, and it was and at the time only rich people had phones, so it was a tax on rich people. And they just recently got rid of it. Al Gore was infamously back in the earlier, 2011, 2012, made the comment that we could, when they were talking about getting rid of it, well, we'll just retask it and reallocate it to the libraries. And it's like, no, this tax was for the Spanish-American War. It's over. Let's get rid of it. And they finally did. And it was like $1. But the thing is, it was like that temporary emergency tax lasted for over 100 years, well past the length of the time it was required. Anyhow, there are 4 categories of hiring for cybersecurity information assurance within the federal government. Okay, they all pay fairly well. IA technical, IA management. Okay, all personnel have to meet the baseline training and certification standards. I really want to stress that. Okay, and this applies for not just the government departments, but for all contractors. And you also see a little bit of what we call a ripple effect. State and local organizations technically don't have to, follow these guidelines, but if they think they might be at some point working with the federal government on something in the future, FEMA comes to mind, or simply because it gives them a little bit of a reassurance if they can turn around to their boss and say, and we've adopted the federal government's 8570 requirements for our hiring, they don't have to come out and come up with a list. They simply say, we're complying we're doing what the federal government says is necessary to be done, and it gives them a little bit of protection, a little bit of legal protection, and if in fact later down the road they have problems. Okay? And you see these ripples in the pond for other federal government agencies like the Department of Agriculture, any government programs with federal funding that might be working with the federal government, state programs, local government programs. Again, everybody, it is a, if you can, if you can implement it, it's an easy thing to do. In summary, cybersecurity skills are in demand. Individual salaries, 84,000, 96,000. These are not managerial salaries. These are individual salaries. They are especially in demand in government organizations. The salaries are slightly lower there, but the working conditions, the benefits, and the employment stability tend to be higher than in many civilian organizations. Okay? In order to get any information assurance cybersecurity position, that's connected to DoD or a contractor to DoD, you need to be familiar with the 8570 8140 directive, because it doesn't matter how qualified you are for a job. Okay, it doesn't matter if your uncle is the director of that department. If you don't if you don't have those vendor certification qualifications, they can't hire you. Uh, and there's no doubt in my mind that other governments, foreign governments, have similar programs in place, because they have many of the same problems and challenges that our government has. And within the federal government, if you haven't had a chance to look at www.opm.gov, it's worth looking at. Okay, it's a pain in the ass to do. For the first time I was there, and I'm not alone in this, it's like, oh my God, this is just, who the heck wants to do this? This is too much work. But you do it because, just like getting a college degree, persistence counts. Yes, it's a pain in the ass, but once you do it, and other people just as well qualified, maybe better qualified than you, have not done it, okay, it is one more window of opportunity for you for a job that you might look at and say, this is actually pretty cool. I remember a time, not now, that the thought of going to work for the State Department and being stationed overseas at one of their embassies as part of the embassy staff, say in Europe, would have been highly, highly attractive to me. Now, no, but there was a time when I would have thought that was just the coolest thing in the entire world. Okay, you don't know if you can't say yes to a job opportunity until it's offered to you. So it's well blowing into for that reason, if for no other. And bear in mind again that it's very likely that other nation states have similar processes to this, okay? They have the same problems and challenges that the U.S. does. So regardless, wherever you might be looking, might be worth looking into. Any questions you have, feel free to email me or to email Dr. Reimers, and we will do our best to answer them. And I'd like to thank you very much. And of course, the references for the things we have just talked about. And that concludes this presentation. Thank you.